Né en 1949, j'ai 75 ans. Je suis marié depuis 50 ans à Nive, une femme merveilleuse. Nous avons 2 enfants, tous deux mariés, et avons 4 petits-enfants. Une famille de 10 personnes maintenant, faisant partie de l'église de Tana, la capitale. Avant d'être évangéliste et missionnaire en plein temps, je fus enseignant dans les lycées publics. Après ma conversion en 1994, à travers des émissions radio, j'évangélisais et je faisais également des programmes télévisés en live. Actuellement, je participe dans un programme de vidéo chrétienne sur Facebook sur le lien God's Wisdom. Je baptise également ceux qui sont enseignés. Je fais des formations de futurs leaders un peu partout à Tana et en province. Photo de la grande rencontre des représentants des 10 églises de Madagascar à Antananarivo en 2015. Actuellement, il y a 13 églises à Madagascar. Tout cela sous la bienveillance de Dieu et guidé par le Saint-Esprit. Les églises du Christ vous saluent.
Good morning. So I watched that twice in French. I picked up Tana and capital, you know. So there's quite a few things that it was Scott's idea to get them to do these videos, and I think it's been great. It's good to see the people that we're helping support. We've had a good month of talking about mission work and various things.
Né en
That's not
1949,
working. Let's try this. There we go. Okay, some of the things that Romain talked about, I'm going to fly by because you've heard them before, and you heard it from him just now. So that's Romain and Evo. He's just turned 75 in February. Former school teacher, former Presbyterian deacon. The one thing I want to correct is when you use old data, sometimes you're incorrect. You know, and last couple of weeks ago, we talked about the church in France at Colmar. We were talking about planting that church. Actually, that church has been planted and been there for a few years. Daniel helped plant that church. He worked with a missionary from Geneva to plant that church. So it's now up and running. The other thing I want to correct is that the life expectancy, I think we mentioned like 35 years in one of our conversations a few years ago for Madagascar. That is totally incorrect. It is now 67.2 according to the World Health Organization. So Madagascar, God started this work. That's the only way I can explain how the events unfolded to put this in place. Doyle Key went down to Madagascar to follow up on some World Bible School lessons. When he got there, he happened to meet this guy driving a taxi whose name was Romain. Okay? So if the plane had been late, if Romain had picked up a fare and left, if Doyle Key had not left a bunch of brochures in the taxi when he left, and, you know, Romain being interested looks at those, that's how the work got started. So it's been about 30 years, native ministry. God has blessed this mission effort from the beginning with explosive growth. Romaine's favorite saying as far as going funding is, God will provide, and he has over 30 years. We went from a big sponsoring congregation to smaller sponsoring congregation to no congregation for a while. It was a donor list made up of people that were in the mission committee where we started. Which was at McKnight. So there was a couple of mission efforts that started from this mission committee. Doyle Key was a person we were already supporting, so we knew about him. So he'd come back to McKnight Road and tell us about that. First, when he told us about the one in Madagascar, he said, hey, you need to work on this. So we started talking to Romaine about
Thank you in advance for your gifts today. We're totaling those numbers, and hopefully we can share them with you at the close of our services today. And if you didn't come prepared to give today, but you still want to give, you can always write a check sooner than later, or you can give on our church app. The top category there right now is for the special mission contribution. There'll be a button right there you can click, and you can make a donation toward that cause as well. So all month long, we've been focusing on our mission efforts. Strasbourg, France. The Acts Campus Ministry here in our own neighborhood. South Pacific Bible College. And of course today, Madagascar, and the work that we're taking on, an added sense of responsibility because we're the sponsoring, we're the one who coordinates much of the work that goes on there. And so when we spend this whole month talking about this, it's natural to be thinking about the great mission efforts that took place in the life of the early church and how that happened. And it seemed to be driven by two things. One, people were transformed by the message of Jesus internally. They recognized how their lives were forever changed by knowing that Jesus is God's Son, died on the cross, resurrected the third day. And that joy that they felt led to a compulsion to, whether it was next door or whether it was across the Aegean Sea, to go places and to tell other people about that same story, to share the joy with as many people as possible. And we think through the book of Acts, we've got stories of some big name, heroic figures who were missionaries across that whole Mediterranean world. So people like the Apostle Peter, who really is the first one to stand up and announce the story of Jesus to a mass crowd. 3,000 people that day were brought to Jesus. I don't know that he slept that night at all, okay? Just to be there, experience that, and to witness and participate in that many people whose lives and futures were changed for the cause of Christ. And if that wasn't enough, he's the guy who shows up at Cornelius' house. Very uncomfortable moment for him. But when God opens his eyes and he realizes this is not just a message for Jewish people, this is a message for all people. And what a jump start that was to expand the scope of the mission to take the message of Jesus as far as they could. People like Barnabas, known as a great encourager, but when he heard that in Antioch there was a breakout movement for Jesus, Barnabas from Jerusalem packed up his bags and said, I got to go there and find out what's happening. In fact, when he found it out, he went over to Paul, and said, you got to come help me with this work. He was so committed to take the message as far and as wide as he could. We have people like Priscilla, who with her husband Aquila, they were kicked out of Rome by the emperor because they were Jewish people, but they decided, hey, this is a great opportunity. We need to see the world anyway. And everywhere they went, Corinth, across the whole, the word is escaping, Macedonian area there. Everywhere they went, they were telling people about Jesus. Even to the city of Ephesus over in Asia, they were well known as people who spoke boldly and confidently about Jesus. And of course, the most prolific missionary we have in Scripture is the Apostle Paul, who did not begin that way, did he? To wake up one day with Jesus talking to you, having before that moment committed yourself to destroying the message and the cause and the people of Christ, and now to be convinced that everything I have done up to this point was wrong-headed and worthless in providing me any hope for the future. And the way the story goes in Scripture is he didn't go to seminary. He woke up the next day or the next week and started telling people about Jesus. Even when he went home, he told people about Jesus. And of course, when he was called from Antioch to go, he and Barnabas picked up and they traveled far and wide. So missionary trip number 1 and number 2 and number 3. And do you think that's all? We've learned the 3, right? Do you think that's all? No, there were others. I mean, he went to Antioch, and he went to Asia, and he went to Macedonia and Greece, and he went to Rome. And ultimately, he probably went to Spain telling people. And he probably would have come to the Americas if he had transportation to get across the ocean. He went as far as he could go, and everywhere he went, he was telling people about Jesus. In fact, Paul would say this to the church at Corinth. He says, I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. I don't know that we feel that same level of compulsion, but it is inspiring to read about, and really something we should be praying for and striving for. So we think of people like this when we think about great heroes of Christian missions, but today I want to talk about unsung heroes of the mission that we're involved in. I want to talk about people who are less well known, people who we don't even know their names, but people who worked to change the lives of thousands of people. In fact, their work far outstretched their own abilities. They helped send Christians around the world, even to this continent. Even the church here at Maryland Heights owes part of our existence to the very unsung heroes we're going to talk about today. So who are these unsung heroes of the Christian mission? Well, Paul refers to them in one of his letters. In fact, he writes his letter to them. This is the church at Philippi, and he's writing a letter to them, our letter to the church at Philippi, the Philippian letter. Paul was there on his second missionary journey. And there wasn't even a synagogue there. In fact, he had to go down to the river just to find where Jewish people were hanging out. And he began to tell them about the story of Jesus. And his testimony really sparked something in the heart of Lydia. And she became a convert to Christianity. She became a follower of Jesus. And he was rejected by masses in the town of Philippi. In fact, he was arrested, he was beaten, he was thrown into jail, but even in jail, his conviction about Jesus won the heart of the jailer who was there. And the jailer brought him to his own home, and Paul told the jailer and his family about the story of Jesus, and the whole family became disciples of Jesus. It's curious to me that they threw him in the jail to shut him up, and by being in jail, he was still winning converts to Christianity. Less than a decade later, Paul circles back to Philippi. And these few converts that he won in that city had now blossomed into a church, a fairly substantial church. Maybe 50, 100 people were in this body of believers here. In fact, they were meeting in homes there, but they were a substantial and proud moment for Paul to say, this is the fruit of the work that I was part of. They were average, everyday people. Some were retired military, but others were clothing manufacturers, public employees, a whole lot of household servants. But together, they made up what we're claiming to be the real unsung heroes of the Christian mission movement. So how in the world were they, these unsung heroes? Well, they didn't quit their jobs. They didn't decide, hey, I need to go with Paul to Spain. They stayed in Philippi. They got up every morning and went to work. But what they did is they supported Paul's missionary effort. In fact, the letter to the Philippians is partially written by Paul as a thank you letter to the church at Philippi. They had taken up a collection. They were so transformed and blessed by what Paul had brought to them that they decided they wanted to be part of that. So they took up a collection. Like we did today, they took up a collection and they sent it with Epaphroditus, one of their own members. They said, take this to Paul. Let him know that we're thinking about him and we're praying for them and we want good things and we want to help be part of that. It was their way to participate in the work that Paul was accomplishing. The very work that changed their lives, they were making possible to change the lives of many other people. So Paul would write to the Philippians and he says this, when I set out from Macedonia, Philippi is in Macedonia, okay? When I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you alone. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. In fact, he would later tell the church at Corinth that when he was in their city teaching in Corinth, he says, I didn't ask any of you to help me out. I didn't ask for money. I didn't ask for food. I didn't ask for anything. But it was these Christians in Macedonia, these Philippian Christians, who helped feed me and clothe me and sustain me so that I could be in your town telling you about the story of Jesus. There were times when money was tight for Paul. In fact, when it got tight, he would carve out a section of his day and go back to his trade, which was tent making, right? He would make tents. And so part of his day was carved out to do that, to raise money, to feed and clothe and keep the work going. But Luke says this in the book of Acts. He says that one time Silas and Timothy went to Macedonia, Philippi, and when they came back, bringing a gift, it says that Paul could then dedicate himself fully to proclaiming that Jesus was the Christ. The gift from the Macedonian Philippian Christians gave Paul the freedom to preach full time to the cities that he was in. And Paul wrote the letter to the Philippians thanking them for their partnership in this gift. In fact, he uses this kind of language. He says this, speaking of their offering, he says, they are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, and pleasing to God. Let me tell you, Paul is probably the most prolific Christian missionary, probably of all time. But his silent partners, those who were the wind beneath his wings, those people that went to work every single day and came home and took care of babies and fed families and did home repair work and got the next day did it all over again, who earned incomes in their 9-to-5 jobs, those people who decided at gatherings like this that they would pool their meager wealth to create something substantial that they could send to Paul to sustain him. These are the unsung heroes. And let me tell you, the city of Maryland Heights is not that much bigger than the city of Philippi. And our church, Maryland Heights, we could probably compare to the size of the church at Philippi. Our members are working class people. We're educators. We're laborers. Some are retired. Some are doing fairly well. Others are just getting by. We're middle America. In many respects, we are like the church at Philippi. We are here in the suburb of St. Louis. We're in the heart of the Midwest. You'd have to travel hundreds of miles to find another country that speaks a different language. In fact, the closest most of us will come to Italy is going down to the Olive Garden, okay? And we are called to go and make disciples. And for some people, that's going to mean packing up and saying goodbye to friends here and traveling to distant countries and participating in ministries there, whether short-term or long-term, to do that. But for most people, it'll mean going next door or going to your family members and talking about Jesus to them. You may never go to the furthest reaches of our planet, but when you donate to the mission work that we are committed to here at Maryland Heights, when we pool our money together, we're going to the furthest corners of the earth. And we join with the Philippians as being the silent heroes of the mission movement. Look how far. Get that next slide, Kelly? Look how far 130 people in the middle of the Midwest can reach. That's just amazing. Hundreds, thousands of people have come to faith, are coming to faith, will come to faith by people who will never step on those continents. Africa, Europe, the Pacific Rim, even local and international students here in our own backyard with the Acts ministry. We go when we send. And that is a noble ministry. That just might be our greatest calling. So we spend this month reminding you about these things. When you give to this church on a weekly basis, monthly basis, however you set up your giving, whether you drop it in a box back there or whether you do it, with the online giving option, when you give to this church, you participate in winning believers on some tiny island in the South Pacific. When you donate to this special contribution, already put it in the plate, did it online, going to do it this next week. When you say, in addition to what I'm giving to this church, I want to buy into this special contribution, you're taking the gospel to isolated villages on the distant island of Madagascar. When you pray for our missionaries, when you send them a note of encouragement, when you email them, and by the way, you can go to our website today and find the most recent newsletters from our missionaries. We have a whole page just dedicated just to the work in Madagascar with various ways that you can participate and help with that. Just go to MHCOC.org and click on the missions tab, and you'll see everything that we know about missions right there. But when you pray for our missionaries, it's like you're going to distant Europe and the village in France of Strasbourg where people from all different nationalities come and gather, and you're part of that work taking Jesus to those people. And when you take food over to the Acts ministry to feed them on a Friday night, do you realize that your mac and cheese is part of what brings a student from India to gather at that moment to hear the story of Jesus, to build or strengthen their faith, and many of whom will go back home and tell their families about that. Your mac and cheese is pretty powerful. When we give, we send. And when we send, we go. May your sending gift help change the world. And may it be a fragrant offering and a sacrifice that pleases God.